African American history is an integral part of American history, and every February we focus on it during Black History Month.
We need to celebrate those stories, those narratives that are supposed to be included in the American narrative, that often are unknown, that are often not celebrated, they're often not recognized.
Maybe not always recognized, but still a big part of the American and Northern Kentucky narrative. Most African Americans who arrived in Kentucky prior to the Civil War arrived as slaves. Many made their way to Covington and Newport.
African Americans in Northern Kentucky compared to the other parts of Kentucky lived differently from the period of enslavement because Northern Kentucky didn't have what was called a plantation economy, where they were people who helped raise folks' kids, sweep the floors, build the buildings, build the houses.
But many were enslaved and worked local tobacco fields. The slave pen, reconstructed in the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, was owned by Kentucky's biggest slave trader, John William Anderson.
Yes, it's about 50 miles away from Cincinnati, right outside of Augusta, Kentucky. And so that's where we were actually discovered it. It was inside a much larger barn, which protected it from the elements for many years. After its use as a slave pen, it was used to hang tobacco.
The Freedom Center sits just across the river from Northern Kentucky for a reason. The Ohio River was a narrow stream that animated the wide gap between free men and slaves. Northern Kentucky's role in fighting slavery was significant. William Shreve Bailey printed Kentucky's only abolitionist newspaper in Newport.
You had individuals like Dr. Bailey out of Newport, Kentucky, who had an anti-slavery newspaper called the Free South, a newspaper printing shop that was raided on several different occasions, the printing press, and type tossed into the rivers.
Northern Kentucky provided several stations and crossing points on the Underground Railroad. Its most notable success was a massive escape known simply as the Cincinnati 28, organized by Underground Railroad conductor John Fairfield.
They basically gathered, and he led them to the banks of the Ohio River, crossed over from Boone County into what we now call Lawrenceburg, Indiana.
Fighting sinking boats and quicksand, they made it to Cincinnati but needed to get further north to avoid bounty hunters. The good people of Cincinnati came up with a macabre but brilliant plan.
And what they did was they went through the streets of Cincinnati in broad daylight with a mock funeral, and no one questioned that it was a funeral procession. They made their way all the way up through North College Hill.
27 of the 28 eventually made it to Canada. One small child died during the escape. Obviously, you don't have to be an African American or a person of color to have an interest in Black History Month. And if you would like to learn more about Northern Kentucky's African American history, or African American history any other place, one of your best places to start is here at the Kenton County Public Library. The library has a diverse collection of writings by African American authors and historical figures like Dr. King, and local history that describes the African American residents. Doctors like James Randolph, who delivered hundreds of local children. There are stories of local African American businesses that made up a substantial but separate economy. Former State Representative Arnold Simpson's father ran a funeral home, his mother a beauty shop.
We had a vibrant African-American community, Joe. We had businesses. We had a multiplicity of Black businesses. I challenge you now to name one right now. We had grocers, we had doctors, we had litany of teachers who lived in our communities, who were role models to our children.
And of course, the churches, a staple then and now of African-American culture, the bedrock of the civil rights movement. What role has the church played in Northern Kentucky African-American history?
Oh, it plays a pivotal role because it helps African Americans understand the contradiction of what I call the three contradictions of struggle, conflict, and perseverance that African Americans have to deal with on a daily basis.
Understanding others' struggles, reducing conflict, and supporting perseverance are goals of any good neighbor. Celebrating Black History Month can help accomplish those goals.
Because Black history is American history. We're all part of the same fabric. So you can't celebrate American history without Black history. We all come from the same origins, and we all have the same goal. So it's the same history.
And not just 1 month a year. For the Kenton County Public Library, I'm Joe Webb.